Hello, I'm Danielle Smith with the Alberta Enterprise Group. I'm collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton to interview candidates for Edmonton City Council. And joining me now is Anne Stevenson. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you are running in what has been called Ward 5, but it's got a new name. Tell us what the name of the ward is.
So this is Ward O'Damon. It takes part of what used to be Ward 6 and some neighborhoods from Ward 2 as well. So honestly, I think it's the 13 greatest neighborhoods in Edmonton. I'm really excited for the opportunity to represent them.
And what does O'Damon mean?
O'Damon is an Anishinaabe word for heartberry. And it's really to reflect the fact that O'Damon is the heart of our city.
Oh, it is well named. All right, let's talk a little bit about why you're running for Edmonton City Council.
Oh, so many reasons. Obviously, there have been so many changes in the past year and a half, and the decisions we make now are going to affect the course of our city for decades to come. I'm really excited to bring my experience, having worked at the City of Edmonton, understanding how the system works, and my experience in the affordable housing sector to really make a difference in how our communities are shaped.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your experience at working in the administration, because there have been some reports that have been a little bit tough on the city for the increase in spending over time, the increase in supervisors and managers, and I want to get your perspective on that. So first of all, there has been an increase in spending that has been 36% above inflation and population growth. Do you think that's reasonable? Is there some reasonable explanation for that, or do you think that's a problem?
Oh, I think we absolutely need to be watching the rise of property taxes and ensure that we're getting good value for each and every one of those dollars. There's a lot of different things at play. Interestingly, I think that some of the tax cuts back in the 90s and early 2000s are really catching up with us now. So we've had a lot of deferred maintenance with our road infrastructure in particular. So that's part of the reason there that we're paying back what was cut previously.
Maybe.
I think. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, on a related note, I'm wondering, that's good perspective. Are you able to give some perspective on the increase in the number of middle managers and supervisors, which have gone up 22% on supervisors, 19% since 2017? Is that related to the issue you just described, or is there something else that we need to know about there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And what I saw during my time at the City of Edmonton was, different reorganizations leading to different groups at different levels coming together, having similar roles. So I think some of that was sort of in name, or just sort of how things were shifted in terms of those departments coming together. What I've really seen is, so many passionate people working at the City of Edmonton, but definitely some consistency needed in terms of roles and responsibilities. I remember at one point, a director had as many staff as a branch manager. So just making sure that there's consistency in terms of the work we're asking people to do and what their title is.
So talk to me a little bit about how you see the role of an elected council member and how they should interact with the administration, because it strikes me in the administration, you'd be able to push along a lot of the initiatives you care about. It's a little more indirect when you get onto council. What do you think you'd be able to do on council that you weren't able to do in administration?
I think for me, what excites me about being on council is being able to provide clear and consistent direction that allows administration to do their best work. I think one of the frustrations in administration was sort of bouncing around from topic to topic, having conflicting messages coming from council, and that really takes away from our ability, the ability of people in administration to do their best work. So again, I think that there are tons of really talented, driven people in administration. It's just really helping to unleash that potential.
So when you talk about running for council, you run as an independent, but you do have to get 7 votes in order to advance an agenda that you want to put forward. So give me some example, maybe from your history or the work that you've done, about how you would get that kind of consensus to move forward.
Yeah, building consensus is huge. And I've served on the board of many different nonprofit organizations and served as chair as well. So many experiences working to bring a group together on a decision. For me, it's about how we frame the question. I think often, regardless of sort of where you are in the political spectrum, there's often a lot of shared common ground. Um, Whether that's, looking at something like affordable housing, for example, that's an area of passion of mine. It really fits the bill for every priority that someone might have. So if the priority is budgetary, affordable housing is absolutely a solution to maintaining our the efficiency of our taxes and keeping our taxes as low as possible. But of course, it's also a great response to folks who are really driven by community care, taking care of people in our community. So again, looking for that common ground and really articulating the value add for all perspectives.
Talk to me a little bit more. You said that affordable housing is an area of passion for you. When you're talking to ward constituents, what are the other issues that they're raising with you as areas of concern?
Yeah, so affordable housing really does come up so frequently, across the board. So residents themselves, I hear it so much from businesses too. There's a lot of concern about some of the social disorder that's happening downtown and the impact that that has on businesses to operate. The other issue that's coming up quite frequently is neighborhood safety. So again, concerns with some of the activities that are being seen, people feeling unsafe going to the downtown and even in their homes in neighborhoods as well. Climate change is another one that comes up frequently. It's really seems to be top of mind for people. And of course, the economy, the economic recovery, jobs, it's huge.
Let's get into all of those issues a little bit more. Let's start with the economy. So I think a lot of problems get solved when you've got a growing economy, attracting more businesses, attracting more residents. It increases the amount of revenue. What do you see as some of the bright spots? What are you hoping happens over the next number of years? Are there any areas in the economy that you think are going to do particularly well?
Yeah, well, an obvious one is the hydrogen economy. We just
Mhm.
had a big announcement recently about investment being made um, in Edmonton's hydrogen economy. So hugely exciting there.
Mhm.
I'm always just amazed at the entrepreneurial spirit of so many Edmontonians as well. I have friends that are sort of moving into the food industry, which just seems to be growing in new and exciting ways. Um, yeah, and also the health innovation side of things. That's another big initiative that's definitely starting to gain traction, and excited to see that move forward.
Do you think there's anything that the city should do proactively to try to attract business? Sometimes you talk about tax holidays or tax
Mm.
reductions or giving direct subsidies and supports. Do you favor any of those types of options?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, actually, the most important thing that the city needs to do sort of right away is get out of the way.
Hmm.
So removing some of the barriers and it is red tape. I know that that's a loaded phrase, but it's very true. And I saw that firsthand working on the zoning bylaw. A lot of our work was just focused on streamlining our regulatory processes. And that sort of feeds into permit processing times. We've heard some stories recently of businesses being delayed from opening at huge cost, right? The carrying costs, the cost of bringing specialists in. But what is really encouraging is that the city can respond and be so efficient, be so quick. I saw that firsthand. I was helping another organization open up a temporary bridge shelter housing facility for
Yeah.
folks experiencing homelessness. And the city was phenomenal. I mean, they responded so quickly. We had all the permits we needed in place within
Yeah.
10 days. And that's because council provided such clear direction about the imperative of providing housing during the pandemic. So again, on council, that's the clarity of direction I want to provide to administration, which is we don't have to spend months doing internal reviews. You just need to know that this is the top priority. It has to happen now. Getting businesses up and running is our top priority.
Can you shed some light on that? What happens within the administration? Why is it that some projects are easier to get through the permitting process and others take so long? Is there anything that you would identify as an obvious bottleneck?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, to be honest, it's because the regulations we have in place really create a lot of barriers.
Hmm.
So, development officers work very hard. They have every desire to move applications forward, but the level of detail is just a bit excruciating sometimes in the zoning bylaw. It's really extreme, and the zoning bylaw is just one piece. There are many other pieces of regulation that have to go through. So the zoning bylaw renewal project that's happening right now to really streamline that process, I think is a great opportunity. I think resourcing is another area that's really important to look at, and it sort of feeds into, we can have some conversations around taxes and staffing levels, but what can be a real challenge is that the opportunity to hire people into a full-time permanent position can be quite limited, and that's often done, um, you know, I would argue sometimes just for the optics of
Mm.
saying that we have a hiring freeze, but those people in those positions are still needed. And so we end up hiring people on 9-month contracts. So
Mm.
just as they're getting up to speed and getting really effective at their work, they have to be let go. Then someone else needs to be hired. It's a terrible cycle, and it can really slow down the process. You lose that
Mm.
continuity so that you
That's
don't have a single person going through the whole process.
That's great insight. Thanks for that. I have a couple more questions to ask you about the economy, one in particular on oil and gas, because it has been at the core of not only the province's success, but also the capital region's success. Leduc is not that far away. Do you think there's still good jobs to be had in the oil and gas sector?
Oh, well, I think our oil and gas sector has had a huge contribution to our community. I think for me, it's being realistic about what the future holds for that industry and making sure that there is an effective transition strategy in place. I think when you have companies like Ford announcing that they're going fully electric in the next decade, I think it is, we really have to look at how sustainable the long-term future is of oil and gas and make sure that we have a transition plan in place for everyone working in that sector.
All right. Let me ask you about renewable because I know that the city has put a big push on that. And one project in particular was pretty controversial. It was the solar project in the River Valley. If you had been on council, how would you have voted on that one?
It's so interesting. When I first heard of this, I just thought, oh, it's a no-brainer. We have to support solar wherever it is, solar all the way. It just makes so much financial sense in terms of securing power at a predictable cost over the coming decades. I think, though, that the arguments around the location and being in the River Valley were very persuasive to me
Mm.
ultimately. When I think about all the vacant land, even downtown, even in my ward, but just that there was potentially other areas where it could have been located. And again, I say this without having read through those reports in full detail, so I may be missing some pertinent information, but that was my take on it at the end of the day.
All right. Let me ask you a bit about we talked a bit about the operational spending side. I do want to talk about capital spending as well. Uh, but first, let me ask you a bit about your focus on taxes. Do you think that the level of tax burden is manageable? Do you think it's too high? Do you think it's too low? There was a tax freeze that came in for the first time since 1997. Is that the kind of policy that should be continued? Give me your take on that.
Yeah, ensuring that we have affordable uh, property tax is incredibly important for everyone, for residents and for businesses. Where I get a bit hesitant is when the goal seems to be chasing headlines. So there
Mm.
was the headline recently, oh, there's a tax-free 0% increase. But that was for, only a portion of ratepayers. So commercial landlords, for example, even affordable housing providers like the one I work for, we were hit with a massive increase in our property taxes.
Mm.
For some providers, that's been up to 30% increase. So, it's taken the burden off of some residents, but it's put it on to other commercial groups. And again, when you're a commercial landlord, those costs get passed on to people who are renting from your buildings. So for me, again, it's not the headline, it's not the tagline, it's ensuring that we're getting efficient and effective use out of every dollar we have, and making sure that we take as few dollars as possible to deliver the services that we need to.
Do you think that the burden that's falling on the business community is fair, or do you think it's too high?
Yeah, I think it's disproportionate. I think
Mm.
that again, it seemed that there was a prioritization of a certain group of the taxpayers. Sort of homeowners tended to be the real benefactors of this recent reduction, and it has had a significant impact on the commercial owners.
Okay, let me ask you about new potential tax increases, because there have from time to time, especially in the context of city charters, talk about whether the sources of revenue needs to be diversified. So, what do you think of that discussion? Are there any new tax powers that you want to see the city have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly important to diversify our revenue streams. Property tax, as you probably know, is just such a blunt instrument. So it is, thinking about businesses, well, and individuals as well. It sort of doesn't care how good of a year you're having. It doesn't care if you've had another financial hit. Um, so in terms of some of the other tools, um, yeah, I mean, I think there are great opportunities potentially around business licensing. So looking at how that works, how that can maybe relate back to profits again, rather than just the property value. Yeah, other fees for service are another approach that could potentially be taken. Again, balancing, ensuring that we have access to essential services for people.
Would you propose anything different about the relative revenue sharing between the province and the city of Edmonton? Because there is a large portion of the property tax bill that's collected on behalf of the province, the education property tax. Does that seem like a fair way of doing it, or would you propose something different?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've really seen that Edmonton isn't getting their fair share of provincial investment. So I'd really want to be advocating that we're gaining that, not even just from the property taxes that the province is collecting, but from the income tax that the province is collecting as well
Hmm.
from Edmontonians, to ensure that that's reinvested back in our community.
All right, let's talk about the capital side. The Valley Line Southeast has had multiple significant delays. What is your understanding of the reason for those delays? And would you do anything differently with some of the other big capital projects that are being contemplated?
Yeah, I have to confess that I don't know the details of the delays, what caused those. I do know that these are incredibly complex construction projects,
Mm.
and there's so much that's beyond people's control. I do know that weather played a big impact on some of the work that's been happening. For me, what's really important is that the city protect its interests. So, for example, the Walterdale Bridge, we all know that had a significant delay, but the city had a clause in that contract that had a penalty, a daily penalty for the delay in that
Mm.
project. So I think that was a great way to mitigate the impact that the delay caused. And again, knowing that there was another bridge in operation. So for me, I think that sort of contractual approach to make sure that there is consequences for when those delays have major impacts is a really important one.
All right. There's a few other big LRT projects being planned. Valley Line West, Metro Line Northwest, Capital Line South. Do you support further LRT expansion, or do you think there's another way to meet transportation goals?
I fully support LRT expansion. I think it's a fantastic investment in our community to move people around our city effectively and efficiently. I do think there are other options as well that can have a lower capital cost implication. So one that's really interesting is the trolley bus, I think it's called, or no, the trackless trolley. So this is new technology that is sort of, we've talked about, rapid bus network, but there's still sort of a stigma or a dislike of buses. It just sort of, as much as we might invest in a rapid bus network, there's a certain segment of the population that is never going to feel comfortable or willing to take a bus. What the trackless trolley does is really simulates that smooth ride, that comfortable ride of a train, without all the need for the track
Hmm.
infrastructure. So I think that's an interesting innovation that we could look at. That said, I think that the redo of the ETS bus routes, it will need some time to see how that's working, and I expect there'll be, some really positive outcomes and some great lessons learned as well.
All right. Let's talk a bit about housing, which you feel very strongly about. When you talk about affordable housing, what is it that you're referring to in particular?
Well, it's really the whole spectrum. So starting from, you know, emergency shelters, bridge housing, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, all the way up to sort of low end of market rent. So it's really for a huge variety of Edmontonians that for whatever reason, sorry, are in housing need.
So let's talk about the plan to end homelessness. Do you think it's working, or do you think there's some more work that needs to be done there?
I think there's been some great progress, and particularly in the last year, we've seen some really exciting developments. I think the 5 new permanent supportive housing projects uh, put forward by the city and sort of started under construction on most sites now, I think. Our own organization started or opened another permanent supportive housing project with Niganan Housing Ventures. So there's lots of positive momentum happening. Where where I think some real opportunities lie is with federal funding coming through, needing the provincial resources to match that to make sure that we can access the full amount. There's billions to be had, and that will make a huge difference in our community.
All right, talk a little bit more, if you would, about the type of work that the organization you're currently with does.
Yeah, so Right at Home provides a range of housing. It's been a community-based nonprofit charity for the past nearly 40 years, about
Hmm.
38 years. We provide everything from, again, permanent supportive housing, so that's for folks transitioning out of homelessness, all the way to sort of affordable market rent. Um, in addition to that housing, and this is a really important message, I think, around affordable housing, providing the roof overhead is very important. It's also being sure that we're providing supports to enable people to really flourish and be successful in their housing as well. That's employment opportunities, life skills support, just creating community to help people stay housed.
All right. Let me ask you the affordable housing question from a bit of a different perspective. For that first-time home buyer, one of
Mm.
the tensions that you have in development is, do you densify and build up in existing communities, or do you do new greenfield development? There's more density, but fewer services, but it can also be a more cost-effective way of entering into first-time home buyership. So maybe you can tell me how you would look at that balance between, how do you build up and densify, or do you build out?
Yeah, great question. I'm very much a build in and up. I think I live in a condo building with my family. I love the vibrancy and convenience of a walkable neighborhood,
Mm.
and a lot of the ward in O'Damon. We're very lucky as a community as a whole to have a lot of that. They talk about the 15-minute community in our neighborhoods. But you're right. I mean, a, a consequence that can emerge is that land value becomes a premium. So housing can be expensive. So I think there's really important steps that we need to make to ensure that even these dense, walkable neighborhoods remain affordable to home buyers. And again, it's always a trade-off. I mean, I think, sorry, this is another area of interest and passion, so I could probably talk for an hour on this. But I think when we're looking at the cost of housing as well, it's so important to look at the cost of transportation too.
Mhm.
So if you're living in a place that requires your home to have 2 cars, for example, that does come at a significant cost. And as taxpayers, some of the lower density development, I mean, lower density development basically never pays for itself from a tax perspective. The cost of servicing of roads seems to always exceed what's received through property taxes. And there are different ways of doing this in terms of being really efficient with the road infrastructure that we're building. But those are sort of, that's a wide range of different impacts in terms of affordability that the way we grow can have.
I'm interested in your perspective on the 15-minute community, because since your ward really is built that, it's almost like the other wards are aspiring to what O'Damon already has. But are there any deficiencies? Are there any areas in
Mm.
any of the communities where you feel would be a priority to make sure that it lives up to that promise of having everything you need in that 15-minute zone?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly, we have a lot of vacant land. There was an article recently in the Yards magazine about the pits of shame. I was seeing the pits of despair. So we do have a lot of vacant land that really detracts from the vibrancy, that sort of makes it less appealing and just more inconvenient to travel in certain parts of the ward. Another huge issue is the lack of 3 bedroom or larger units. My team created this great map, chose the location of 3 bedroom units, and there's just a desert. There's effectively no 3 bedroom units for a large chunk of our community. So, putting some policies into place to really encourage that housing mix to ensure that a variety of households can live in this, again, as you say, in this great, um, great neighborhood that has so many opportunities is definitely a priority.
All right, let's talk about the city being a developer on Blatchford, the old city center airport lands. Do you support the city taking on that role, or do you think there's a better way to develop those lands?
Oh, I think the Blatchford initiative is a really exciting one, and it's been great getting to visit there and see the community come together. I mean, it just seems like it's happened overnight, even though it's been longer than that. But really excited to start to see that development happening. So much of what was happening at the beginning was very boring, was very all under the ground
Hmm.
type of work. Um, Again, I could put on my urban design hat and maybe I think that there could have been value of starting closer to the LRT station to sort of build off of that existing transit connection. But again, the folks that I know living up there are really enjoying it, really excited to see it come together. And yeah, I think it's a great initiative.
All right. Well, let's then talk a little bit more about how the city delivers services. And I've just got a few questions about things that have come up in the last year. So, first of all, when you look at the city's involvement in public-private partnerships or even coordinating with nonprofits, a few of the things that come to mind are the city already has a portion of the garbage collection that's privatized. They have there's discussion about operating golf courses with the private sector. I think you've talked about some of the collaborations in the nonprofit sector. Generally speaking, what do you think of those kinds of approaches? And are there any other examples of where you'd want to where that might be something we should have a look at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always open to different operating models and different ideas about how we can offer services as efficiently and effectively as possible. I think what concerns me is that often contracting out to other private organizations sort of provides false savings.
Hmm.
So not only like literally are there sometimes not any actual savings realized due to the cost of the contract, but when we think about it more holistically, we're taking typically jobs that might be privatized end up being lower pay, so maybe minimum wage only. So the folks working in those positions are then in need of affordable housing and other city services. So we sort of end up paying in this different way, right? It's again, I talk a little bit about budget silos. And we only look at this one budget line item. Sure, we can maybe see a small reduction, but really up over here now we're having a huge spike in the need for other city services. So I think it's really important that we consider the holistic impacts of those decisions. I think too, just a general comment around public-private partnerships is just ensuring that the public sector, what I've sort of seen in past agreements is that the public sector takes on a lot of the risk without necessarily getting to join in the reward.
Hmm.
So I think it's really important. Again, I think the city can play an important role in helping to mitigate risk for projects that are important to achieve our city vision, but again, maybe don't make full, market sense. But again, it's just making sure that we also, as the public, get to enjoy the upside as well.
All right. Let me ask you about some of the other decisions that have been made in the last year. First of all, the council dropped the residential speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. Some had wanted to see it go further to 30 kilometers per hour. What do you think?
I think the issue is really how we design and build our roads.
Hmm.
So I think as a stopgap measure, having lower speed limits is really important for the safety of our community. Um, I know as a driver, I'm impatient. I'm often late, and it's tough. It's tough to go slowly. But again, it's for the benefit and the health of our community. What I'd really like to see change in a more systemic way is, again, how we design and build our roads. So there's a phrase called design speed, and it's basically how comfortable you feel driving on a road. So no matter what this posted speed limit is, if you're driving down sort of a narrower local road and there's maybe cars parked on both sides, you're probably going to slow down. You're going to slow down even if the speed limit was 50 because they talk about the sticky side. So there's just sort of, enough happening on the periphery that you're just a bit more alert. So those are the sort of interventions that I'd really like to see to make our community safer.
All right. Let me ask you about policing because it got into the media in the last year or so. The discussion about defund the police is what the movement called itself. But what does that mean to you?
For me, it's about fiscal responsibility and making sure that we're getting what we want out of the police services. The financing side of it is really shocking. I mean, we spend more on police than we do on parks, rec centers, libraries, community services combined. So when that's the case, we really need to be looking at that budget item and making sure that we're getting the right value. Also, 32% of calls that the police are responding to are for person in need calls. There's no crime happening. So again, we're putting our police officers in situations they're not trained for. They're not mental health providers. They're not social workers. So we really need to make sure that we're doing a better job of matching the need to the service that's being provided.
Do you hear in your community any concern about safety and security and the need for more policing?
It's certainly an issue that's quite prevalent in sort of downtown and the surrounding communities. Um, you know, there there are a lot of concerns. People aren't feeling safe on the streets, and the people on the streets themselves are also not safe with the opioid crisis. There's a lot of factors that are sort of leaving everyone feeling unsafe.
All right. Let me ask you a question about referenda because there is going to be a referendum in the fall on the municipal ballot on the issue of provincial equalization. Generally speaking, what do you think of that type of approach of putting issues to the people for a direct vote versus your role as an elected council member of making the decisions on their behalf?
Yeah, well, I think generally the city of Edmonton, um, there's some great opportunities to have public engagement on decisions. I always think for me, there's sort of three factors when making a decision for the municipality. I think there's obviously what people say, what they care about, what their perspectives are. There's also policy, so that's the vision and the direction of our city, and then there's the technical side of things. So when all three of those things align, decisions are really easy to make. But sometimes, policy and the facts won't line up with what people are thinking and feeling. So it's really about having those community conversations to again find that common ground and provide the rationale for decisions moving forward.
Okay, I have a bit of a fun question here because I'm looking at a picture of the think tank downtown library. Love
Mhm.
it or hate it?
I think it looks way better in person, and the inside is really exciting. There's some great spaces in there. I'm excited to explore it more as we start to reopen.
Well, it's a talking piece, that's for sure. Let's talk about just sort of in the final question here about the role that you have as an elected council member as well, because sometimes there'll be a situation where the administration recommends a course of action on the grounds that it's best for the city as a whole, but the residents of your communities are going to ask you to vote the other way. What would you do in those circumstances?
Yeah, again, I'm back to sort of my triangle of decision making. So absolutely hearing what people are thinking is a huge component. But I think as an elected official, it's also my responsibility to look at the technical data and also the policy framework that's a much broader piece. Something I like to reflect on is just how do we make the best decisions as a community? And if we going back to speed limits, let's say, if we wanted to find and sort of decide as a community what the safest speed limit would be, is it better to ask folks who are just sort of randomly selected, who have an opportunity to sort of read the science, look at the stats, and then come to a consensus on that, or to have a group of people who have all just received speeding tickets? They're impacted really directly by the speed limit, but they don't necessarily have a more objective perspective. So I think often decisions that we're directly impacted by can be really uncomfortable and they can be really difficult. But it's really taking that long view about what's best for the overall health of the community.
All right, well, thanks so much for the conversation today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
That is your candidate, Anne Stevenson, candidate for Ward 5, O'Damon.